Last video, we discussed nut advantage, which dictates the player that should be more aggressive in flop scenarios. So how does nut advantage affect our bet sizing? If we possess a nut advantage on the flop, we can apply maximum pressure throughout the hand. With a potential bet all in across 3 streets, we push leverage and threaten the opponent with the risk of having to commit all his chips. As the preflop raiser, when we possess a significant nut advantage, we can have large sizings post-flop. For example, if the board comes ace, king, 6, then it's a spot where all the strongest hands are in our range, but not in the preflop caller's range. This allows us to bet large and be all in more frequently. Situations where we possess a nut disadvantage are likely to be spots where we won't do much flop betting at all. This simplifies our decisions. If our opponent has a nut advantage on the flop and we bet a large size with speculative hands, we'll get into tough spots. If we're out of position, we should hardly be betting these flops at all. When nut advantage is unclear, meaning either player can have the nuts with about the same frequency, things get tricky. Now we must look deeper into the ranges at play. Equity distribution is how likely each range is to win at showdown. If one player has an overall range equity advantage, it's usually enough to bet the flop more often. There will be many flops where nut advantage is split between players, but one player has a tighter preflop range. A tight range means fewer weak hands. In this scenario, the player benefits from betting a small sizing with the high frequency because the other player will have a lot of hands which can't continue and have to fold to almost any sizing. A player with an overall equity advantage, in this case more middle hands and fewer weak hands, will want to push that equity through to the next street to force other players to call with a higher frequency and take advantage of their weaker range on later streets. Think of it this way. An equity advantage over an opponent when you share the nuts is like you have dice numbers 4 through 6, and they have all numbers 1 through 6. Therefore, your rolls are going to outperform your opponents on average. A small bet sizing on the flop often makes sense as the preflop raiser because it puts other players into awkward positions with their weak or middle strength hands on any board. A small bet allows us to get some value when we have our strongest hands and may entice our opponent to raise instead of just calling.